Hi, welcome Monish, Prashant, and Nitin. Welcome to the CTQ Smartcast that we have been doing. This is like a follow-up episode to the last one that we did. So last time when we met in August, organizations and leaders were still, trying to make sense of remote working. We spoke about drawing analogies from different worlds, what changes leaders are considering. It was still in the process of what next then. But now we are more than what, 1 quarter, 4, 5 months into this life, which can be a long time, long enough for me to make this beard a permanent feature, and a lot of other changes. Like we said, 10 days, the Indian cricket team has also made a big difference in their perception of life. So today we wanted to pick your brains on the changes that you are seeing that are happening right now, and it's not just something which is in the offing, but what you're actually seeing and how you think how you think these things will pan out. One thing that struck us recently was, organizations are trying to make changes to deal with the long-term impact of this switch to remote working. Something like a director remote work is a legitimate role that some organizations are hiring for. So first question to start with is, in terms of the organizational design and roles, do you think organizations now need a role like that, which is specifically looking at this switch? And if you have somebody, a person who's actually taking up that role, what are the kind of challenges that that person will face? And I want to just flip the order this time, so I'm going to start with Nitin, like we mentioned in the middle today. So yeah, I would ask Nitin to go first on this question.
Okay, yeah. So first of all, very happy to be back, and it's a good thing to kind of take stock of where we are after a few months after we spoke about all the things, and in some cases we might have been totally wrong. I don't think we were, but it could very well have been totally wrong. So, but then coming to the specific points about what has changed in terms of permanent sort of remote working, etc. So of course, I'll talk very specifically from our company's perspective. We are in the US healthcare business, and that itself is, as it is, working in India is kind of a struggle for us. Meaning, some of the clients are not very happy. Some people still don't give us permission to talk about it. In fact, the data always resides in the US. I mean, there's no question of any data here. So we only operate through things like VDI, AWS, and so on. So in that sense, if you think about it, it's actually easier to do remote working, because doesn't matter where you are, so long as you have a way to connect to the internet and to AWS, you are actually working in Chicago or Arlington or wherever. However, that's from a technology perspective. I mean, and we all understand that very well, but unfortunately our clients don't. So for them, if you're in India, you are always it's a little suspect as to how things are going to work out, etc. So therefore, there were clients earlier who had actually said that we can't even use laptops. I mean, people who work on them have to work. So fortunately, we were able to convince them at that time to that, look, otherwise we can't work for you at all. So so they permitted us, and so far that permission is still valid. But I anticipate that there will be these kind of clients, some of them, not a big number, but some of the subset, who will probably, once things kind of cool down, and fortunately slash unfortunately in the US things are not cooling down at all. So they still, we are actually much better off right now in India. So but I do see a situation where for some of the clients we will have no choice but to if they say that, look, you have to have people come back into the office and work from the office, we may have to do that. However, like I said, that's a small majority, or small minority, I should say. So bulk of the clients, we feel that we should be able to now, given the scenario we are in and everybody what they have gone through, we should be able to have a permanent hybrid model. So what, and again, not very different from what most of you are doing, I'm sure. But so the way we are looking at it is, we may have a few roles which are totally remote, meaning permanently remote. And when I say permanently remote, we still expect them to come in maybe once in a month, or once in 2 months, to kind of gel with the team and so on. But we have some handpicked roles for that this kind of a role you can, which is mostly individual contribution, not too much of collaboration required, etc. So which we have already started offering those roles as a permanent remote thing. But for a vast majority of the others, the plan is, and again, not set in stone yet, but the plan is that it will be like a rotational thing, which means that it's a hybrid model where we talk to our people and kind of got a consensus. And what seems to be popular, or will be popular, is um, decide some frequency. So, for example, we are thinking of 1 week in the office followed by 4 weeks at home. Now, why 4 weeks? And so basically, on one hand, you have only 20% of the staff in the office at any point in time, so that ensures all your social distancing, this, that, all that stuff. But importantly, if you have 4 weeks off at a stretch rather than one day per week, the advantage is that people who want to stay in their wherever native places, or not necessarily in Pune, and really not pay the rent. If somebody might find it more convenient to just pay for a little hotel, strike a deal with them, and come and stay here for a week, and then 4 weeks off. And totally, their spend might actually be lower. They might get their family life and so on and so forth. And why is that 1 week required? Because most of our people, and we included, they have started now feeling that, look, I really need that socialization. I really need that kind of a talking to people. And so it's not just the official collaboration, but that you know mm, water cooler talk, and the gossip and everything else, which is not as easy on Zoom, as we all know. So that's where we are going. Given all this, to come back to your original question, we are not looking at anything like a specific role for remote working, because most of it will be remote. And we believe that, like we had discussed last time, I think, is that each manager, I think all of them have to really be equipped with how to deal with this situation. And they've already learned a lot, but continue to learn on that front. And rather than have it's not like a legal thing where some expert from a legal angle is going to advise you. It's more of human nature, how the dynamics are going to play out, and so on. So we believe that it's going to be more decentralized. Yes, there will be some element of education that will be required, some amount of help that will be required, and maybe you guys can also play a role in that, in terms of sharing best practices and so on. But that's what we plan to do. Sorry, a long-winded answer, because you put me in the spot first, so I got that opportunity.
Yeah, thanks, Nitin. I think that's probably going to hold true for most people in terms of how people are going to work, in the near future. And that is an interesting take in terms of how you are expecting the managers to actually take up more of that mentoring and that kind of a role, which enables their teams to do better. So, Prashant, I wanted to bring you in next in terms of whether you think managers are the ones who should be doing this. Do you see a role for someone else to help the managers, like what, say, the role of this director remote work seems to be promising? We don't really know yet what that person will be doing, but do you think that's the direction that you would want to take, people will be taking?
I would agree with Nitin out here. So I personally do not yet see the value of a separate role. And for the following reasons. One thing is, I think, hopefully, in this conversation or in conversations such as this, and across as the company, as the industry evolves, we need to define what is expected of the role. Because if you look at the kind of things that are coming out, I still feel that this role is turning out to be more of a operational role, right? I mean, we do not want to create yet another yet another role that's going to deal with operational stuff. I'm more interested in seeing what is the cognitive value that this role would bring up. And whatever few things that I can think about, in terms of, as an example, one of the things that I feel very strong about that is getting missed out in this mode of working is the whole idea of context. Nitin mentioned water cooler conversations. It's very similar. So I talk about the missing the context in a company. For example, the context of the large deal that's happening, the context of changes that are happening because of a large deal that's happening. So these are things that are not so easy to spread, in a remote environment. I don't know whether there's any direct value for a person not involved in a deal, whether it adds value, but then the person at least gets a context as to why certain decisions are being taken in the company. So now, those are things that I believe that a mature manager or leader, should be able to figure out how to spread. The operational stuff is easy, right? I mean, I know there was some talk about whether wages should get regularized or whether even shift operations, whether the timings in the operations and the 1 week, 4 week schedule that Nitin talked about. I think it's for managers to take up. I still don't see how a different role would actually take care of these things. Right. So I'm of that bandwagon. But then I wanted to actually throw in something out here. While we haven't yet taken a stance on how it's going to be, we don't want to be the leaders in defining the next way of working. We'll wait and watch. But somehow, personally, I feel the closer we are to getting to where we were, the better off we would be. Knowing very well that we will not be able to get to exactly where we were, but if we direct our focus towards where we were and take it in the context, what I'm saying is, if you're able to generate everything that existed earlier, and able to create a similar environment in a new way of working, I think that's what so the end goal should be that. And I'll tell you why I'm getting to that. So because if I look at India as a ecosystem, I think our strength derived from collaborative working. And I'm speaking as by generalizing it. There might be specifics that might be different. Traditionally, Indians, we've been great instruction takers. And over the last few years, we've been, punching above, and, trying to do better. I mean, companies like Icertis, right? I mean, the great shining example. But these are rare, right? These are still rare. And if you take that away from us, if remote working takes away the collaborative environment where I can just look next door, to the guy next to me and ask for help, or you huddle around and do things. And if you're saying we have to shift to a completely electronic remote way of doing all this stuff, I think will take some time, and especially people who are in the middle of their career. I think people who join in now will join with a new paradigm, and for them this is the way it works. For people who are on the higher end of the trajectory, they set the rules, right? I mean, frankly speaking, it's easy to sit back and set the rules and expect things. But people in the middle are going to struggle with this. So, but that's an important piece, right? That's an important piece in the Indian ecosystem. So for me, the closer we can get to defining towards being where we were, maybe but with a newer platform, the better it is for us from an Indian ecosystem perspective.
Right. Yeah. Thanks, Prashant. And the reason why I wanted to bring you in, Monish, last was I have a feeling you have a slightly different take on this. So, I would want you to address the points that Nitin and Prashant made. And also, the point that Prashant made of, things being tactical. So, is there a more strategic role for something like this, whether it is perception based or actual work? Is there something like that? And is there a nuance with, the scale of the organization and what stage are, is that organization in as well? So just wanted your thoughts on those lines.
No, absolutely. And Nitin and Prashant set the context for me so nicely, right? So thank you both. I'll give you some examples, right? In the beginning of the pandemic, when we went into lockdown, Samir and I kind of had to huddle together with the leadership team, internally my co-founder, and then figure out what we wanted to do and how to react, right? One big thing that came out of it was our 4 rings of responsibility. We said, first take of yourself, your family, your community, then your business. And it gave people something to anchor how they react to the crisis. Then came many countless discussions, I would say, in terms of how do we react, what do we do, if we have to reopen in 2 months, if we have to reopen in 3 months, how will we do it? The 3 months soon became 6 months, soon became 9 months. Time just kind of went by. And the good thing was, at the beginning, we had told people, hey, we'll give you enough notice before we ask you to come back to work. And we extended that to June 2021 already, 3 months ago. So the point was that we realized that, hey, if we have to scale, we have like 1,500 people now. We ended up hiring 300 people after the lockdown, right? So there's a lot of people who have been coming on board who have never seen our offices, never met an Icertian, never met their managers in person. It's all been virtual, right? So it's like a open source community trying to build software and trying to build systems and selling and pre-sales and all of these kind of, and global operations, right? Not just in India, but in the US and Europe and Australia. And it's been a challenge. So we actually thought seriously about at least if not a VP level position, but a GM level position of remote working. We went through some of the requirements. I think the big thing we noticed was, hey, this is not one facet or one skill. We started with compensation and taxation in the US. Big problem, huge problem, in fact. We had to address visa issues. People who had traveled to the US or come back, now they're working from the US for the Indian sub, Indians traveling to the US working for the US sub from the US, which is kind of, it's a mess there legally, right? And nobody knows what to do with it. Start from that angle, compliance, taxation, etc., to mental health. That's the other extreme. We started getting a lot of issues in terms of, anger, in terms of depression, in terms of people just not coping up with family. There have been a few breakups. So all that kind of stuff has come together after 6 to 9 months. And you need someone to, even let the managers know how to tackle this, right, effectively. And not just how to tackle this, because you cannot actually wing it. You have to have a policy, because you have to have, you have to protect the company, you have to protect yourself, you have to protect the employee as well. So it's not an easy job. So what we ended up doing, and these are, this is probably the answer to your second question, what would the role face as challenge, right? And these were some of the challenges, that it was not just one expertise or one operational kind of experience that you needed, but you needed all of this multifaceted thing. And the way we solved the problem was we put together a 3-person committee, one from finance, one from HR, and one from engineering, which is our largest community in terms of largest organization. And that committee actually works as the director of remote work. They discuss what we have to do, what our choices are, and they recommend. And then we as a senior leadership take a decision. I think that's worked pretty well. And we have chosen all these 3 people from different geographies. So we get that context as well. And it just seems to be much better and much more organized than what I've been hearing from several companies in terms of how they're reacting and how they're solving these problems.
Yeah, I'll leave it to Prashant and Nitin to respond to what Monish has said at this point.
Yeah.
It's open.
Yeah, so I think that's a novel approach, having the committee, those 3 functions take care of it. And so there is, so basically, for my purpose, I map it to what Nitin and I were stating anyway, that, there's no need for a role as in a person to exist, but it exists in some form that takes care of stuff. There's just one, part that I'd like to bring out. For me, any role that exists has a role to play inside. But for me, any role that exists, especially at the senior levels, also has to be sufficiently externalized. Which means, and I primarily go with the paradigm that, there are better people than us who exist outside. And if we have to get better, then we got to benchmark and bring in those inputs out here. What happens, and Monish would love to hear from you if you've been addressing that issue. What happens, by having certain roles take up another additional responsibilities, that you don't get enough time to externalize, because there is enough happening, say, on the psychological front in terms of mental health. There is enough happening in terms of keeping track of compliances. I'll tell you, for example, we struggled with how do we now have women work? Can women work beyond 8:30? Right now they're at their homes. Is it allowed or not? The Indian system still doesn't have an answer for that. Right, but we were struggling to find answers to that. So there is enough to do, at the higher end of the value chain for a role such as this. But that needs to be defined. If it's going to be done as a additional responsibility, well, then it's going to be mostly inside out inputs that are going to come out there. But we probably are not going to be benchmarking with the best. Monish, if you have thought that through, I would love to hear if you've been addressing that.
No, I think it's a very valid point that you need focus, and you need you need to carve out certain amount of bandwidth and time to do this. I think one big thing that has happened, and I'll go back to your kind of India perspective as well, that going from instruction takers to going to the higher end of the value chain, and then how do you kind of bring that hey, मैं साथ वाले बंदे को पूछ रहा हूँ कि how do I do this, right? That kind of thing that we are very good at. And to a certain extent, the jugaad kind of thing that we are very good at, which you can't do alone in many cases, right? So I think if you kind of put all of that together, and as both of you said, the manager needs to take care. He or she is on point, right? They are the ones who are actually making that change happen. But then, then you need bandwidth from senior leadership, you need bandwidth from middle management, and then you obviously need bandwidth downstream, right? And this is all bandwidth that we've all learned in the last 9-10 months, everybody to carve out, to figure out these new challenges, right? I don't think people have, or any organizations have actually hired just because we hit the pandemic to solve the problems of the pandemic. I think we all kind of carved out that bandwidth. And I think it is more important to do it that way, because someone who comes in externally now in a situation like this to change how an organization works will find that going very difficult. So the committee actually worked well for us primarily for that reason, because people wanted to solve the problem. Both people on the committee and the people who actually took feedback from the committee. So both sides were actually very eager to kind of be involved and solve that problem. And we didn't run into any bandwidth issues at all. In fact, people prioritized this as an important part of their role, and they responded very well in terms of being very creative and talking externally about hey, aap kya kar rahe hain? What is the other company doing? What is Microsoft doing? What is Netflix doing, and so on and so forth. And one good thing about software is once you tell people that, hey, Apache, most of the Apache software is actually built remotely when no one ever meets or sees anyone, not even video calls, even the execs understand. So that's the good part.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to what Prashant said, and Monish referred to that about this whole socialization and, talking to each other and, all that. So interestingly, we use a tool for tracking the input as well as output. Of course, every company has its own mechanisms, right? And what interestingly we found was that after this remote working, that socialization, which was kind of, what should we say, non-value added. There is a value, of course, but not business value added. That has gone down significantly. But what you said, Prashant, about turning around and asking somebody, "Arey bhai, ye kaise karte ho tum? I'm stuck here," etc. That continues. So because you don't feel guilty about doing asking that kind of a question, whereas you might feel a little bit guilty about pinging somebody and say, "Bhai, kya chal raha hai? Ye movie dekha kya? Aaj cricket mein kya hua?" You might feel a little guilty about that. So we found that the the total amount of time that is spent on what we call core work, right? I mean, if you're developer, then development work, if it's QA, then QA work, and whatever is your core work, that has actually percentage wise gone up significantly. And so in fact, what I'm saying is that 1 week, 4 week kind of a thing that we are talking about is to ensure that the non-value added work, non-value added activities, you get a chance to do that. So I'm actually expecting that if you have a 5 week cycle, that 1 week when you are in the office will be the least productive time. Now, in the long run, it might actually help, but in that specific short focus 1 week, you might actually, you will have probably lunches and dinners, and you'll have, some, we'll probably call Harish and do a quiz, and, all that kind of stuff will probably happen in that 1 week for that team. So it's a necessary part of of work, which is not, strictly speaking, non-value added, but actually it adds value in a different way.
No, that's a very good point. I completely agree, Nitin. I think, but I'll also add a caveat to it. I think initially, first 6 months, it was very true. As soon as things started opening up, it had a sharp decline, right?
Mm-hmm.
So as soon as movie theaters opened up and restaurants opened up and malls opened up, people started meeting friends and so on. I think there was a sharp drop, which was expected, which was actually good, because you can't continue with this kind of a pressure for a long time. But I completely agree with you. I think if you go to that 1 week to 4 week model, you'll find that 1 week to be surprisingly inefficiently valuable.
Yeah, so that's an interesting way to put it, Monish. So in fact, what Nitin was saying, triggered another thought that Ramanand and I had been thinking of much earlier. So does this then change the role of a physical space? It is not about getting work done. It is actually just getting people together and getting them to do all these so-called non-value adding activities. Do you see that happening in 2021?
So if I may start, because I'm really excited. Yeah. So we actually, so we have these 6 floors in MCC, Mutha Chambers on Senapati Bapat Road. We took 1 floor and we said, this will be our fun space. This is our first experiment with, how the new office worldwide will look like. Right. And the current theme is like large, really large 75-inch screens all over the place, couches and things like that, where people come to have fun, to collaborate, not to have conference calls. The conference calls can be done on Zoom, or we use Teams, of course. But you come into the office to have fun and collaborate and build teams and build friendships and so on and so forth. And we did a poll, and people are also extremely excited. They have some really good ideas. We've actually toyed around with having a tempo traveler, one of those big 14-seaters, 16-seaters, converting them to a mobile office with conferencing and Wi-Fi and so on and so forth. So I've been working on that idea, branding and stuff. Let's see if we can do that. So that you can call it up near your house in the neighborhood, where 3 or 4 people can come together and have a meeting and a conference call with the right background, and looks like an office and a nice conference room. So there's lots of ideas coming in. And I think that perception that Nitin said, that, hey, will be kind of, you come in and that will probably be the least efficient period of work, but of course more exciting. We are trying to see, from a philosophy perspective, we're trying to see if people can have fun there, so that they can connect to the culture and the values of the company much better. So one of the things we've been missing completely is, how do we, and people get so bored of meetings, video calls and so on, that they really don't put their head in non-essential stuff like that, like values, conversations and stories and anecdotes. That these are the things that we'll actually have. So on the walls, we'll have these anecdotes, we'll have videos playing of our values and examples and so on. I think it's very exciting. I think that probably defines much of the work that might happen, or the workplace evolution that might happen, I'm hopeful actually, as opposed to kind of saying that it will. It may not happen, but I'm hopeful it will, because I think it will give people the charm of working in a software company with all the flexibilities of doing open source development, right? The kind of the traditional open source community. I think that will be huge, because most, if you look at Google, if you look at cultures across most companies, they've been trying to do that. If you go to the Google campus or the Apple campus, you feel like, you are in a zone which is for, made for work and fun. And I think that evolution will be extremely exciting.
Yeah, and just surely in terms of real estate, I mean, we have a capacity of 750 seats, and we had thought originally, before all this pandemic hit us, that once we reach about 650, we'll probably be, start looking at where do we expand. Do we, go to a different city, different location in Pune, same building, whatever, all those things. We said, okay, time maybe. And this was when we were about 480 when in March. And we said, abhi bahut time hai. Guess what? Right now we are 750 already, and we are not even thinking about that problem. Because in fact, like Monish, you said, we are thinking about, okay, now that we're going to be thinking only 20% of the staff will be in the office, how do we convert some part of the office to do exactly what Monish is saying? So we have 2 floors. So, maybe one floor we convert it into more like a fun space, because like I said, if people are going to come only for that week, most of the time they're going to have this kind of a thing rather than actually sit and code. And for that, there'll be space on another floor. So something like that. So the workspace, the way we imagine it, and earlier, like you said, Google's and Apple's were the more of the exceptions. I think that will probably be more of a rule now. You come to work, have a fun space, and then go back and work anyway. Most of the work you do from home.
Yeah, and we've actually been very aggressive, Nitin. We were already full. We added 300 people, and we gave away more than 40,000 square feet of space. So we actually reduced quite a bit, because we said, hey, we will need more space, but we will probably spread it out across the country, as opposed to having one big building or 2 big buildings in Pune. So I think we have committed to that model. And
yeah.
And the worst thing, our CFO asked, what is the worst thing you will do? I said, worst thing is we'll go back and get 40,000 square feet at 10% discount.
Okay, so I have a point here, but on a lighter note, we haven't been on the better side of Monish's benevolence in terms of giving up space. He's been actively working to drive us out of the current space, but then
I didn't. I said give up.
but then but I just wanted to throw a spanner in the works here to the thoughts that are going around, primarily also to see Harish and Ramanand if we want to have a third version of this conversation. Now, we talked about the fun space and everything, but under the hypothesis that this is to stay, let's assume that remote working is here to stay in a significant portion. And to Monish's point earlier, that people have now found, now that the lockdown and the restrictions have reduced, people have found ways to socialize, and those ways are outside the office, right? For a long time, and I might be wrong, but I'll go out on a limb and say it anyway. For a long time, and companies have kind of resorted to a lot of superficial things to create what I would call as a great workplace or a great work environment, in terms of fun at work, dancing classes, yoga classes, good meals outside, all the paraphernalia. I think with if remote working is indeed here to stay, then those paradigms are going to be challenged. And if people have to be tied to a company, like Monish gave the example of Apache, right? Then it really needs to be the quality of work. It really needs to be excitement in work. So I think there's going to be a huge challenge, and if at all, the new role or the committee, will need to think about something futuristic. I think they need to think about how you do employee branding, right? So how do you market your own products? How do you, and it cannot just be marketing. It's truly the ones with the great products, great challenging work will be able to retain good talent. because you suddenly lost out on all the other things that you called as things that led to a great place to work. Which is why I, feel that these are going to be really interesting times, and a lot of things are going to be challenged. While there is a war for talent, people who are not able to recognize this will be left with the not so good talent. If we are able to recognize these and more, we don't know what else will unearth, right? Those are the ones that will be left with that will actually get the good talent and progress. I mean, these are some thoughts that I got.
Yeah, in fact, I wanted to add something to what Prashant said. In fact, and Prashant, that's exactly the way you plant things in a movie to make sure the producer gets you the sequel as well, right? So yeah, thanks for the plant, Prashant. So
You can pay me later.
Yes. So I wanted to add a sub question to the point that you have thrown out there, Prashant, in terms of how people are accepting or looking at the work as well. The focus has changed from input to the output now, in terms of what is the value that each person is actually adding, which was there earlier as well. But still, a lot of that would still be seen in terms of the number of hours that you would put in, and it was more on the input. But now it is clearly shifted to the output. So I wanted to bring that part as well. When you're talking about how employees are actually doing this and how they are talking about what quality work they are doing, has there been a shift in people, appraisers, managers looking at the value that their team members are bringing in? Have you seen a switch there, which should ideally be addressing what you have mentioned as well? So just wanted to add that as well in when all of you start addressing what Prashant mentioned earlier.
Is the question to me?
It's open to all.
I mean, yeah, go ahead, Monish.
No, go ahead.
No, I mean, I really don't have much to say, because I think these are early days. And I'll say early days not because it's not happening. Early days because it yet remains to be validated whether it's indeed happening, right? So if you go out and ask, whether the assessments are happening with the new context in mind, the answer is yes. But then, we're just 3, 4, 5 months into even maturing into this kind of thinking. So whether it is indeed happening with the context, whether the metrics are being renormalized to define what is good and what is not good, it's still a long way. I mean, it's still some distance away. I won't say a long way. I mean, we're much smarter than what we think ourselves to be. So that's why I don't want to actually go out and state whether, but I would bet on the fact that we are a fairly smart industry and usually end up clinging onto the right things and the right way of doing things. So I mean, I would bet on that.
Yeah. So in our case, we actually have had situations where we had to tell the managers, management, etc., not to focus on the availability, for example. Arey, wo online nahi tha, It was 9 o'clock and the guy was still not online. I said, so what? So we had to teach people, because see, a lot of them, we have both software development as well as a lot of operations. And a lot of the operations folks come from the typical services industry, where, the boss is watching you, and, there's all that kind of, very, very face-to-face kind of a thing is there. So that habit took some time to get away from. And we had to actually coach, and to that original point that I made, that, our managers have to be a remote sort of directors or whatever you call them. So we had to coach people as to how not to look at the input, how not to look at person being online or available, but more to look at the output and the metrics and so on and so forth. While we do have an automated way of looking at the input anyway, but that is not dependent on the time. I mean, there are situations now that, there are two kinds of situations that we found. One, where there were people where, see, in the office, when they used to work in the office, suppose there was a target, like, so many transactions are to be done per day or whatever. Suppose the guy has reached on the 80%, but then now it's 7 o'clock and, he has to go. he has a train to catch or whatever, he used to go. Now there were some people who were like literally stretching till midnight because the target is still not complete, and he didn't have in his mind, he didn't have an excuse to say abhi mera time ho gaya. So that also happened. And the reverse, of course, there were always the other extra end of the spectrum where people said, हाँ भी बाद में कर लो, तो अभी थोड़ा सो लेता हूँ, अभी थोड़ा picture देख लेता हूँ. Those kind of things also would happen. So the long story short, we had to coach our management to really focus on the metrics. Some of them had it already, but they were just not focusing enough. Some of them did not even have it. To your point, Prashant, we had to actually create the right metrics to make sure that people understand, and also take a buy-in from the people themselves, saying that, yeah, this is a reasonable metric to track against. And then you do what you want. I mean, if it needs collaboration, you set up time together. If it doesn't need collaboration, like a transaction processing on your own, you can do it whenever you want. You can do it at night. You can do it in the daytime. We don't care. So that took a long time, at least a few months, to come to that sort of state of equilibrium.
Yeah, and then I think it's interesting. For me, quality of work, excitement, having a good manager and good compensation is all motherhood and apple pie. It has nothing to do with the pandemic, in and out of it, right? It's also the measurement of, productivity is also to a certain extent like that. I agree with Nitin that the parameters change in terms of sometimes how you measure, but ideally they shouldn't even change at all, right? Ideally they should be the same. And we have had people work from, most of the sales force globally works from home. So, and they get measured because there's very simple, do you make your quota or not? If you don't make your quota 3 times in a row, you're out. So the equation is very straightforward there. And the measurement is very straightforward. And engineers' measurement becomes, qualitative as well, and it's harder to do. But I think the pandemic has actually done 2 things in my mind, which are important for a better analysis of efficiency and productivity. I think first is they have nixed all of the execs who never knew how to work from home or remotely. I think that mind shift has been huge. I mean, Samir and I talk about this. Samir used to say, "Hey, ye ho hi nahi sakta." It's just, sometimes because you've managed. He was CEO of Aztecsoft. Then Microsoft had a very kind of in the office culture for a long time in the early 80s and 90s. And it was difficult for him to say, everybody's working from home. And he actually went on record saying, "Hey, I found it out and I was pleasantly surprised that this actually works." So this whole kind of model of, hey, how do I measure productivity, whether it is, these guys are in front of me or not, can I hit them and scream at them or not? That whole management culture hopefully will just vanish with this. Because now both manager and reportee, if I may use the word, have realized that there is a better way of doing things in the last 9-10 months, right? They know that this works. This model actually works. The manager gets what he or she wants, and the employee gets what they want, and they get work done, and they're happy about it. I think that change will be very qualitatively important for any kind of productivity metrics, etc., because now there is a chance that this will become how many check-ins did you do, how many bugs did you find, and how much innovation did you add, and those 3 metrics, and you can actually measure an engineer. I mean, not always, but ideally you would get to that level very quickly. Right? That's what open source does. It's a peer review system. It's about check-ins. It's about quality of your code review. It's about quality of your comments. It's about the quality of your design and your design reviews, right? Not the number of hours you spend.
Yeah, I think we had spoken about the open source movement, being a big inspiration for how to look at this in the last conversation as well. So looks like that's a parallel that you have drawn the most from, Monish.
Absolutely. I think, why not use a model that has worked so well and given us some of the greatest software ever built?
Right. Yeah.
So I have a question, if I may, Harish.
Yeah.
What I wanted to ask all three of them was, what has the last 4 to 6 months taught you about the first principles of work management leadership? In the sense that I think a lot of this has revealed or peeled back layers of things that we take for granted. So, for example, that like Prashant alluded to, there being a foosball table being equivalent to fun. Um, it was the easiest thing to do, but now you have people working for you even though they don't have access to that foosball table, and therefore the fun space is you're recasting it as a culture space. Or similarly, that synchronous collaboration is important, but it can be perhaps synchronous can give way to asynchronous for some time. So are there any principles first, like have you gone back to basics in some fashion and said, these are the 2, 3 things that I think will remain true for the next few years, irrespective of what mode we find ourselves in, because you don't know what mode you will find yourself in. So maybe could you comment on that aspect? Maybe we'll start with Prashant.
Okay. So I'll speak about two things. One thing that I feel will get accentuated more is meritocracy. I think what this brings up clearly will differentiate the really, really good people from people who need help, or people who are not good. I think this remote working, I believe, will lead us towards creating that sieve even better. So the whole thing about meritocracy as a culture and all will, that will get accentuated very, very clearly. If you ask me how, I don't know, but then I clearly see it, happening. The one thing that I feel we need to start getting used to, and I'm going to again dovetail off my previous point itself, is that if you looked at jobs, right? I mean, if I draw on my personal experience, the reason why my previous jobs are still dear to me is because of the relationships that I built. And these relationships were actually nurtured over not just the work, but challenges during work, the late nights we spent in a certain meeting room, but also outside work, and the family is gelling. Somehow I believe that that's going to go away, right? If we are going to speak about moving to a pure remote working model, or even a hybrid model for that matter, because for me, even a hybrid model is just an in-between arrangement to take care of some particular missing aspect of work. So I wanted to draw on these two extremes. One thing which is good that will get accentuated will be the performance part. One thing that for future generations will miss out on, if this is indeed the order of the day, would be an important aspect of the quality of life, which is relationships you create at work.
Yeah. So from my perspective, it's a slight deviation from what Prashant just said, and I've been thinking about how do I, will I not have the lesser intensity of relationship with the company itself? I mean, individuals apart. And how do I make sure that that doesn't go away? In fact, that hybrid model, like I said, is primarily for that, because expect, and I don't know whether you guys have seen it, but after a big drop in attrition, I've started seeing a spike again. As more companies figure out how to recruit, is one part of it, but the other part of it is also, and we have seen a lot of people who joined us after the pandemic have already started leaving us because that connect is not there. We try hard, to kind of have these one-on-one sessions and this and that, all that you do, but it's hard to recreate that. And therefore, on one hand, like you said, meritocracy, I agree with that part. And I had not thought about it, but I agree with it when you said it. But also, retaining people, companies, like to Monish's point earlier, you really got to give them some good, solid work, which the guy is going to enjoy and feel content and feel sort of satisfied at the end of the day. Otherwise, what you're paying or what, anyway, I'm sitting at home and doing my work, right? So whether I work for IDeaS or Icertis or Evolent, how does it matter? I should be happy at the end of the day. So that is going to be a big difference. I mean, those days of people working for a company forever, those of course were gone already, even before we came to this stage. But now it might become even more transient. you better give me a good job. Otherwise, in fact, there's a nice cartoon, which I think Dilbert, where the guy says, look, I need to take this call because this is from the other company which thinks I work full time for them. And I've often wondered how many of them are actually doing this gig economy where they are supposed to be full time for 3 companies. And particularly because I'm not putting a time limit on you, right? I can work in the morning, afternoon, evening, night. It doesn't matter. So that whole, it's like that casual flings instead of a deep relationship. That kind of an analogy is what I'm thinking about.
And nothing wrong with the dating culture, right? Tinder
Sure.
Tinder is good. No, but I think, kidding aside, I think I agree, Nitin. I think that values and culture, creating culture spaces as opposed to just fun spaces, creating that kind of sense of belonging, which is so important to humans, right? That, hey, I belong to a company, I belong to a family, I belong to a country. All of that kind of, absolutely, that is very necessary. But to kind of come back to Rama's question, I think fundamentally, I don't think anything has changed, right? I think it's just a different problem we are trying to solve in different ways. But fundamentally, I don't think any of our values or any of our learnings have changed. We have, of course, learned a lot. I mean, I feel like resonating with what Satya said, 10 years of digital transformation happening in 6 months, or 2 months even. This is about learning what I wouldn't have learned in 6 years in 6 months. I think there's an enormous amount of learning that has gone in about relationships, about how good people are, about when we ask people to contribute to the community. I think that the floodgates opened when this whole Black Lives Matter thing happened in the US. Just the response of the whole community in terms of giving not just money but time, of actually listening and coming out on the streets to demonstrate. I think that was very heartwarming, and I think those fundamentals, I don't think, have changed and should not change in a crisis like this. But one fundamental thing that, as I said, definitely changed is people know now that working at home and working in an environment that actually is more comfortable for you works. Both the company and the employee, I mean, both have realized this because the whole world went that way, right? If it had just been India, or if it had just been the US, or halfway through, this wouldn't have worked. But now everybody knows that this works. And that tells me that it is almost impossible to get back to normal, right? Pre-pandemic. It'll always be a hybrid. It'll always be, we did a survey, 98% of people said we would like to come back to the office. 98% of them also said that we would like to come back to the office 2 days a week. Right. So I think that's the hybrid model we'll probably end up with very quickly before we realize that this becomes a way of life for us. Right.
Right. Yeah. I think we've almost come to the end of the scheduled time that we have. So I'll ask for some hot takes from each of you on a certain question that I posed to you. This may sound like a very, you may need to paint with a very, very broad brush, but let's do it that way. So we'll start with Monish. Do you think people are able to better manage their life and work right now?
No, I think they are heavily tilted towards work. And I think things need to be opened up. And this is globally, not just in India, of course. I think it's heavily tilted toward work. That work-life balance is heavily tilted right now.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Nitin, what kind of roles do you think have seen a fundamental shift in how they are, how people need to take up those roles?
As I gave an example earlier, anybody who's doing sort of, transaction processing. See, it's a different thing when you're working in a Scrum team. It might have some nuances, even though you can work in an open source kind of a culture. But particularly when you're working independently, or solving some individual problems, that really, people have realized that there was probably more disturbance in the office than and they can work when they are at their peak efficiency. I often give an example of a friend of mine who was called at 9 p.m. for a meeting by his boss, and he didn't say a word. And his boss finally said, "Look, you're a senior person, you're not contributing." He said, "Can I call you for a meeting at 5 in the morning and let's see how you perform?" Right? So each person's time clock. So we have put these artificial things, right? I mean, 9 to 5, and we have to be in office at 9, and so on and so forth. So the people worked in different time zones, in different time patterns. So that, I think, is really actually helping. And I agree with Monish that it's right now tilted more towards work, but I think we'll reach a balance. We have already seen that pendulum swing back a little bit once the things have opened up. But I think overall we'll still be better off as a community.
Right. Thanks. And Prashant, last question to you: whether we go back to the complete, pre-normal that you seem to be pining for, or the hybrid that Monish is voting for. What roles do you think will be, are at risk of getting left behind, irrespective of which end of the spectrum that we go to?
Let me first set it on record that I'm not pining for that. All that I'm saying is that we should keep that as the beacon light and design our current philosophies to reach that. And the answer to your question is all roles. Okay, so it's not just a single role. I mean, to again the Icertis example of having created a committee to ensure that different, new dimensions or flavors are added to every role, right? That's the reason why they have representatives from different groups be part of this committee. So I think every role would, either need to redefine itself or has the danger of getting redundant. If they do not, get to certain new ways of working. So for me, I think it's a constant discovery process. And I see, and the beauty about this is no one has been through this. Or maybe the last generation to have gone through this must have been in the Spanish flu era in a completely different industry. So right now, a lot of ideas are moving ahead. I think we'll need to derive from thought leaders from different fields. It's going to be a self-discovery. There are going to be leaders that are going to emerge in this space. There are going to be laggards. There are going to be some people in the middle. But then that makes it even more exciting to see how to do. But I think great time for consulting companies. Once again, it's a revival of sorts. For them, and let's see how it pans out.
Yeah.
If I may make a quick comment, if you don't mind, Harish.
Yes, please.
So one of the roles, I think we struggle with this quite a lot. One of the roles is the admin role, housekeeping and admin. And it was very hard. What do we do with these people? And we have lots of space. We had 30, 35 people in that role. What do you do with those now? Nobody, because the offices are closed. Even when we come back, most likely we'll probably have smaller offices and we'll need less people. And we were very concerned, and I think it was. I think the biggest silver lining of what we saw in these times was that every one of them picked up something. 4 of them actually became our IT support folks. They actually went through a 3-month training program, picked up how to break fix. They transformed themselves into. Many of them learned driving, so they kind of manage all of the logistics around the city. And all of them learned to speak English, which was huge. I mean, and many of their kids actually go to English medium schools, and suddenly now their father or mother coming in and talking to them in English is a huge transformational thing. And that was excellent to see. I mean, just the passion with which they threw themselves into all of this was beautiful. So I couldn't resist commenting on that.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks, Monish, for pointing that out. So like we always do, we'll end with a quiz question. This is not a corporate role that I'm talking about, okay? But this is a role that has been around for many years now, but comes into prominence around this time of the year. So while the current rates are almost 1/5 of the older rates, people are still making the same amount of money, people who are in this role. As usual, there's more demand than supply. Also because many people have not been able to make a switch to the more tech-enabled way of working in 2020. Those who have adapted are able to deliver a much superior experience than before. And people who take up these roles are officially also part of something called as the IBRBS. I'll expand the IBRB, which is the International Brotherhood of Red Bearded. So if you can give me what S stands for.
Santas.
Santa.
Yeah, so these are people who take up the roles of Santa Claus. So interestingly, earlier the rates used to be something like $150 to $225 per hour. And now it's down to like $40 per hour on a Zoom call. But the experience has been superior because they've actually been sending a questionnaire to parents to fill in advance. So they say, yeah, Monish is a big fan of gaming. So then I come in and I say, wow, you like gaming a lot, and your parents are doing something. And the kid says, oh, wow, Santa knows about, what I really love, which was not available earlier. So that's how, Santas have been looking at their own future relevance. So on that note, thanks a lot. Thanks for another insightful conversation and great points from all of you. Gives us a lot of a lot of things to chew on and think about, and come back to you. And Prashant has already planted the seed for the sequel. So yeah, we'll set that up in 2021.
If you want to get into the habit of reading or explore diverse topics that you wouldn't have read otherwise, CTQ Compounds is for you. Compounds are expertly curated by us and are a great way to slip in 15 minutes of reading non-fiction every day. For how you can be a part of a compound, go to ctqcompounds.com. You can also see what our compound members have to say about their experience there. That's ctqcompounds.com.